Spring had always been a time of renewal in the Olympic Peninsula. But this year, the air felt different. Asha could sense it. A subtle but undeniable shift that pulsed through the forest like a slow creeping shadow. It wasn't just the usual markers of the season, the thawing of the earth, the budding of the trees, the chorus of the frogs that filled the night air. This was something deeper. It was a heaviness that clung to the wind that crept through the underbrush, making her fur prickle and her senses sharpen. She could feel it in her bones, as surely as she could feel the new life growing inside of her. Asha, with her thick, tawny fur and wise silver-flecked eyes, had experienced many springs in her life, but none had ever carried so much weight. This was the season she would bring her child into the world. She had known for some time now, from the way her belly had grown heavy and the way Kubota had begun watching her with his protective, anxious look in his eyes. Her mate, strong and silent as always, had grown restless, constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. But the danger wasn't just the rogue Sasquatch that roamed the northern ridges. Though he was a threat, to be sure, it was the humans. They were coming closer, encroaching on their home, their forest, with each passing day. Kubota stood at the edge of the clearing, his broad shoulders tensed as he listened to the distant sounds of machines. Human machines. His fur, a deep earthy brown, blended seamlessly with the trees around him. From a distance, he might have been mistaken for one of the ancient cedars that towered above. But up close, Asha could see the strain in his eyes, the way his muscles rippled with unease beneath his thick coat. "They're getting bolder," he rumbled, his voice low and gravelly. "I saw their fires last night, closer than they've ever been. We may not have much time before they find us." Asha sat beside him, her hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling the life stir within. "We'll find a way," she said softly, though her heart was heavy with uncertainty. "We always do." But even as she said those words, she wasn't sure that she believed them. The humans were relentless. They came in greater numbers each year, pushing deeper into the forest with their strange tools and loud machines, tearing down the trees that stood for centuries. They were careless, trampling over the land as if it was theirs to claim. Asha had seen them up close once, years ago, when she ventured too close to one of their camps. They were smaller than her kind, but there was something terrifying about their numbers and the strange, hard objects they carried. Tools that could rip through the forest with ease, as though nature itself bent to their will. "They're close," Kubota continued, his eyes narrowing as he sniffed the air. "Too close." Asha followed his gaze to the distant horizon, where the trees thinned out into open land. She could almost smell the smoke from the human fires, the acrid scent of burning wood mixing with the sweet fragrance of pine and moss. It was a smell that always made her uneasy. The humans didn't belong here. They didn't respect the land the way that her kind did. They took and took, never giving anything back. "They won't stop," she murmured, almost to herself. "Not until they've taken everything." Kubota growled low in his throat, a sound of frustration and helplessness. "Then we need to prepare." Asha knew he was right. With the humans closing in and the baby's birth approaching, they needed to find a safe place, a hidden place where she could bring the child into the world without fear of discovery. It wasn't just a matter of comfort. It was survival. The humans were a threat, but so was the forest itself. The world was full of dangers for a newborn, from predators that stalked the underbrush to the unpredictable weather that could turn from gentle rain to torrential storms in a matter of hours. They had scoured the forest for days, moving deeper and deeper into their territory, searching for a place that would offer them the protection they needed. Finally, they found it. A secluded grove, hidden deep within the thick patch of ancient cedar trees. The trees here were massive, their trunks wide enough to hide a family of Sasquatch from view, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead that shielded the ground from the harshness of the elements. The air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sound of a nearby stream trickled through the silence, offering both fresh water and a natural barrier between them and any approaching danger. "This will do," Kubota said, his voice thick with determination. The two of them set out work immediately, gathering materials to build a nest that would cradle both Asha and their newborn child. Asha's movements were slower now, the weight of pregnancy making every step laborious, but she refused to let Kubota do all the work. She wove together long, flexible branches, creating a sturdy foundation while Kubota found piles of soft moss and leaves to line the inside. They worked side by side, as they always had, their hands moving in rhythm with the forest around them. Asha took her time selecting the softest moss, pressing it into the base of the nest until it formed a thick, cushiony bed. It needed to be perfect, strong enough to support her weight during birth, but soft enough to protect the delicate form of their child when the time came. Kubota used his powerful arms to gather animal hides they had saved from past hunts, draping them over the nest to provide warmth and shelter from the cool spring nights. As they worked, Asha felt a flutter of movement in her belly, a reminder of the life growing inside of her. The baby was strong. She could feel it in the way that he kicked and shifted, already testing his strength against the confines of her body. A smile tugged at her lips despite the exhaustion that weighed on her. This child would be special. She could feel it in her bones. "It's almost ready," Kubota said, standing back to admire their work. "Just a few more branches to cover the top." Asha nodded, her hand resting on her belly. "We'll be safe here," she said softly. "At least for a while." But even as she spoke those words, she couldn't shake the feeling that safety was a fleeting thing. The humans were relentless, always pushing forward, always expanding. And then there was the other danger, the one that stalked the shadows of their territory. His name was never spoken aloud, but everyone knew who he was. The rogue Sasquatch, a giant among giants, even larger than Kubota, with a temper as wild as the storms that sometimes swept through the mountains. He had no clan, no family. He lived alone, a creature of pure instinct and rage. The stories about him were dark and terrifying, passing down from their parents, whispered in the darkness by the older Sasquatch who had seen him and survived. It was said that the rogue had once been a part of a clan, long ago, but he had been cast out for reasons that no one could fully explain. Some said that he had killed his own kin in a fit of rage. Others claimed that he had simply grown too wild, too dangerous, even for his own kind. Most believed that he had killed many hikers on the Appalachian Trail who dared to venture too far into the backcountry near his old clan's territory. Whatever the truth, he was a force to be reckoned with, a threat that loomed over the forest like a shadow, always there, lurking just beyond the edge of sight. Asha had never seen him herself, but Kubota had, once many years ago, before they had become mates. He didn't talk about it much, but she knew the encounter had left a deep impression on him. "I saw him by the northern ridge," Kubota told her one night. His voice had been low, almost a whisper, as if speaking of the rogue would somehow summon him from the shadows. He was huge, bigger than any of us. His fur was dark, almost black, and his eyes, they were wild, like nothing I've seen. He wasn't like us, Asha. He was something else. Asha shivered at the memory of Kubota's words. The rogue was a danger they couldn't ignore, especially now with a baby on the way. They knew they needed to be alert, always on guard, in case he wandered too close to their territory. But for now, their focus was on the nest, on the birth. The night Asha went into labor was calm and clear. The sky above the canopy was a deep velvety black, dotted with stars that twinkled faintly through the gaps in the trees. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the fresh scent of pine and damp earth. It should have been a peaceful night, a night of resting and gathering strength. But instead, Asha's body was racked with pain. It started slowly, a dull ache deep in her belly that made her shift uncomfortably in the nest. Kubota was beside her, his large frame casting a protective shadow over the entrance to their shelter. He had been restless all day, sensing that the time was near, and now that it had come, His eyes were sharp with concern. Asha? His voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, a quiet urgency. Is it time? Asha nodded, unable to speak as another wave of pain rolled through her. She gripped the edge of the nest, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The baby was coming. She could feel it, the pressure building inside her body instinctively preparing for the birth. Kubota knelt beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, offering her what comfort he could. "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort, her body straining with the intensity of the labor. Each contraction seemed to tear through her like fire, but Asha remained focused, her mind fixed on the life she was about to bring into the world. She could feel the baby moving inside her, shifting lower, ready to emerge. Kubota stayed by her side the entire time, his presence a steady, grounding force as she fought through the pain. He wiped the sweat from her brow with a cool clump of moss, his deep voice whispering words of encouragement as the night dragged on. "You're strong, Asha," he whispered. "You can do this. You're almost there." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the baby came. With one last agonizing push, Asha felt the release of the pressure, and the child slid from her body and into the world. The first sound that filled the air was a tiny, sharp cry, a cry that sent a wave of relief and joy over her, even as her body trembled with exhaustion. Kubota caught the newborn in his large hands, his face filled with awe and wonder as he looked down at their son. He was small, covered in soft, dark fur, his eyes wide and blinking, as he took his first breaths of the world outside of the womb. "Coda," Asha whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. She reached out and Kubota gently placed the baby in her arms, his tiny form warm and alive against her chest. "Our son." Asha gazed down at him, her heart swelling with love and pride. He was perfect. Their Coda, their strong and beautiful boy. But as she held him close, she felt another sharp pain rip through her body. Unexpected, sharp, and wrong. A second baby. Asha gasped, her eyes widening in shock as her body convulsed again. Kubota's face twisted with concern as he realized what was happening. A twin. They hadn't known. But as the second baby came into the world, Asha knew immediately that something was very wrong. There was no cry. Kubota's face fell as he gently lifted the still, silent form of their daughter. She was small, too small, her body limp and lifeless in his hands. Asha's heart shattered as she reached out to touch her daughter's tiny face, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Kubota." Her voice broke, thick with grief. Kubota didn't speak. He couldn't. His face was a mask of sorrow as he wrapped their daughter in soft leaves, his hands trembling as he prepared for her burial. Asha watched through the veil of tears as he carried her out of the nest, into the grove where the ancient cedar trees stood like silent sentinels. They buried their daughter beneath the largest tree, the earth cool and damp as Kubota gently laid her to rest. Asha knelt beside the grave, her heart heavy with loss. They had gained a son, but they had lost a daughter. The joy and sorrow mingled together in a way that left Asha feeling hollow, like a piece of her soul had been torn away. "We will never forget you," she whispered, her hand resting on the freshly turned soil. "You will always be with us." The days after the birth were a blur of exhaustion and quiet mourning. Asha and Kubota took turns watching over Coda, their grief for their daughter lingering like a shadow of their small family. But even in their sorrow, they knew they had to stay vigilant. The humans were getting closer, and the rogue still lurked somewhere in the forest. Each day, the sounds of human activity grew louder, machines tearing through the earth, the distant roar of engines, and the sharp crack of trees being felled. The once quiet forest was now filled with the noise of human expansion, and it was only a matter of time before they stumbled upon Asha and Kubota's nest. "They're coming," Kubota said one evening. his voice heavy with resignation. "We need to move." Asha nodded, holding Coda close as he slept. They couldn't stay here any longer. The humans were relentless, and with a newborn to protect, they couldn't afford to take any chances. But it wasn't just the humans that worried Asha. The rogue Sasquatch was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, a looming threat that hung over them like a dark cloud. She had seen signs of him: broken branches, disturbed earth, and the unmistakable stench of his presence. He was close. Too close. "We'll find a new place," Asha said, though her voice lacked confidence. "Somewhere deeper in the forest." Kubota nodded, but the worry in his eyes was clear. The forest was their home, but it was no longer safe. The humans were closing in, and the rogue was a danger they couldn't ignore. With heavy hearts, they left the grove behind, carrying Coda in their arms as they ventured deeper into the wilderness. The forest stretched out before them, vast and untamed, full of danger and promise. But Asha knew one thing for certain: they would do whatever it took to protect their family. They had survived the loss of their daughter, the encroachment of the humans, and the looming threat of the rogue. They would survive whatever came next. They had to. It had been a few days since Asha had given birth to little Coda. Her newborn was nursing well, and Asha was recovering quickly. But the human presence was getting closer and closer to their nest, forcing Asha and Kubota to make some tough decisions. "We can't stay here anymore," Kubota said grimly one evening. "The humans are simply too close. We need to move deeper into the forest, find a new place to make our home." Asha nodded solemnly, casting a worried glance down at the sleeping Coda. "I was afraid of this, but you're right. We can't risk them finding us here. It's not safe for Coda." Kubota reached out and gently stroked Coda's soft fur. "Don't worry. We'll find a good place to go. Somewhere where the humans won't be able to get to us." He paused, brow furrowed in thought. "We'll have to leave first thing in the morning." Asha sighed heavily. "All right. I'll start getting ready." This was such a good home for us. Kubota pulled her into a comforting embrace. "I know. But we'll find another. And Coda will be safe. That's what matters the most." The next morning they set out with Coda snuggled securely against Asha's chest. They traveled deeper into the dense forest, Kubota leading the way and keeping a watchful eye for any sign of the humans. After a few hours of trekking, they came across a small clearing that seemed like a good spot to set up a new temporary home. "This looks promising," Kubota said, surveying the area. "Lots of cover, away from any trails the humans might use. We can build a shelter here and hunker down for a while." Asha nodded in agreement, gently rocking Coda as he fussed a bit. "All right, let's get started then. The sooner we get settled, the better I'll feel." They worked quickly to construct a simple lean-to structure, using branches, leaves, and whatever other materials they could find in the clearing. It wasn't the most sturdy or weatherproof shelter, but it would have to do for now. As the sun started to set, they huddled inside. Coda nestled warmly between them. "There. That should do it," Kubota said, giving the structure a pat. "It's not much, but it'll keep the rain off of us at least." Asha nodded, running a hand over Coda. "It's perfect. I just hope it keeps us hidden from the humans." Kubota drew closer, wrapping a comforting arm around her. "Don't worry. We're well off the trails now. I don't think they'll find us here." They settled down for the night, Coda snoozing peacefully while Asha and Kubota kept watch. But just as they were starting to drift off, a sudden bone-chilling howl pierced the silence of the forest. Asha stiffened, her eyes growing wide. What was that? Kubota tensed, listening intently. "I don't know, but it didn't sound good." He paused and then let out a series of low, rumbling grunts, a warning call to any potential threats in the area. They waited with bated breath, straining their ears to hear any other sounds. After a few tense moments, another howl echoed through the trees. Closer this time. Kubota responded with more grunts, deeper and more insistent. Asha huddled closer to Coda, her heart pounding. "Kubota, what is that? What's out there?" "I'm not sure, But whatever it is, it's getting closer. Stay close to me and keep quiet." They fell silent, listening intently as the forest seemed to come alive around them. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, and a strange guttural growling reached their ears. Kubota's grunts grew louder, more desperate, as he tried to ward off this unseen threat. Suddenly, a towering, shadowy figure loomed at the edge of their shelter. Asha stifled a gasp, clutching Coda tightly. Kubota rose to his feet, letting out a series of deep, booming barks, a clear warning for the intruder to back off. The figure paused and then let out a bone-chilling scream that made Asha's blood run cold. It was a primal, animalistic sound, full of raw power and aggression. Kubota responded with a series of thunderous mouth pops, like a bat striking a tree, hoping to intimidate the larger Sasquatch. For a moment, the two giants stared each other down, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, with a final earth-shaking roar, the figure retreated back into the darkness of the forest. Asha let out a shaky breath, her heart racing. "Kubota, what was that?" Kubota remained tense, eyes scanning the tree line. I think it was the rogue, the one we've been hearing about." For the first time, he spoke his name. Adenoa, the Cherokee word for war. Asha's eyes widened in fear. Adenoa? But why would he come so close to our shelter? He had never done that before. Kubota shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but I'm sure it has something to do with Coda. Either way, we need to be very careful from now on. He is dangerous, and he is not afraid to come after us." They huddled together in the small shelter, Coda whimpering softly in Asha's arms. The rest of the night passed in tense silence, with both Asha and Kubota keeping a constant vigil, alert for any sign of the rogue's return. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, Kubota finally relaxed a bit, letting out a heavy sigh. "I think he's gone for now, but we still need to find a more secure place to stay, something that can better protect us." Asha nodded, gently rocking Coda. "Agreed. The sooner we can get moved, the better. I don't want to risk Coda's safety." They quickly packed up the little that they had and set out, Kubota leading the way deeper into the forest. The going was slow, with Asha having to carry Coda and Kubota constantly on the lookout for any sign of Adenoa. After several hours of trekking, they came across a small cave, partially hidden by a tangle of fallen trees and overgrown vegetation. Kubota paused, studying it closely. "This could work," he murmured, running a hand along the rough stone. "It's secluded and the entrance is well hidden. We should be able to fortify it and make it a decent shelter." Asha peered inside, Coda still cradled against her chest. "It does seem promising, and if that rogue comes back, at least we'll have some protection." Kubota nodded. "Exactly. Let's get started. The sooner we get settled, the better I'll feel." They spent the rest of the day working to clear out the cave and reinforce the entrance. Kubota gathered large branches and sturdy logs to create a makeshift barricade, while Asha gathered soft bedding materials and arranged them in a cozy nest for Coda. By the time that night fell, they had a relatively secure and comfortable shelter to call home. As they settled in for the evening, Kubota kept a watchful eye on the forest around them. "I haven't heard any sign of Adenoa since last night. Hopefully he's moved on." Asha nodded, gently stroking Coda's fur. "Let's hope so. I don't think I could handle another confrontation like that." Kubota reached out and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Don't worry. I won't let anything happen to you or Coda. I'll keep us safe. I promise." They fell into a light sleep, Kubota waking up periodically to check the perimeter. But just as the first hints of dawn began to peek over the horizon, a bone-chilling howl shattered the stillness of the forest. Kubota's eyes snapped wide open and he bolted upright, a low, rumbling growl building in his chest. Asha sat up as well, clutching Coda close. "He's back," Kubota whispered, already moving to reinforce the cave's entrance. "Stay inside. Keep quiet." Asha nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She huddled deeper into the cave, shielding Coda with her body as Kubota went to work. The howling grew closer, accompanied by the snapping of branches and the rustling of leaves. Kubota braced himself, ready to defend his family at all cost. Suddenly, a massive figure emerged from the trees, towering over the makeshift barricade. Kubota let out a series of thunderous barks, his deep, booming voice echoing through the forest. Adenoa paused, then unleashed an earth-shaking roar in response. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through Asha's very bones, as she had to fight the urge to leave the safety of the cave to join Kubota to defend their newfound home. Kubota answered with more barks, his own voice rising in volume and intensity. The two Sasquatches stared each other down. For a moment, it seemed like they might come to blows. But then, Adenoa let out a final guttural growl and turned, disappearing back into the trees. Kubota waited, listening intently, before finally relaxing his stance. He hurried back into the cave, checking on Asha and Coda. "Are you both all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Asha nodded, still trembling slightly. "Yes, we're fine. But Kubota, he's so much bigger than you. I'm scared for us, for Coda." Kubota reached out and pulled her into a comforting embrace. I know. But I won't let him hurt us. I promise. We're safe here in this cave. That rogue won't be able to get to us." Asha buried her face in his chest, taking comfort in his warmth and strength. "I hope you're right. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you or Coda." They stayed like that for a while, Kubota gently soothing Asha's fears. Finally, the sun began to rise, and they settled back down. Coda nestled safely between them. The next few days passed in relative peace, with no further sign of the rogue. Kubota used the time to continue fortifying their new home, reinforcing the entrance and gathering supplies. Asha, meanwhile, focused on caring for Coda, keeping him warm and safe. She was relieved to be in a more secure cave, away from the prying eyes of the humans. One evening, as they huddled together, Kubota turned to Asha, a serious expression on his face. "Asha, I think we need to start thinking about what we're going to do if that rogue comes back. We can't keep relying on this cave to protect us forever." Asha looked up, her brow furrowed with worry. "What do you mean? Where else could we go?" Kubota sighed, running a hand through his thick fur. "I'm not sure, but we need to be prepared. He is dangerous, and it's clear he's not going to leave us alone." Asha glanced down at Coda, who was snuggled against her chest, fast asleep. "I don't want to move again. Coda is still so young, and I'm worried about exposing him to more danger." Kubota reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "I know, but we have to do what's best for him, and for all of us. If that rogue comes back and we can't defend ourselves here, we may have no choice but to keep moving." Asha nodded slowly, her heart heavy. "All right. I'll start thinking about what we might do, where we could go. But Kubota, promise me you'll do everything you can to keep us safe here." Kubota met her gaze, his expression resolute. "I promise, Asha. I'll fight him with everything I have, if I have to. I won't let him hurt you or Coda, no matter what." Asha felt a glimmer of hope in the midst of her fear. Kubota was her rock, her protector, and she knew he would do whatever it took to keep their family safe. As the days passed, Asha and Kubota continued to fortify their cave, stockpiling supplies and keeping constant watch for any sign of the rogue menace. But the relative peace was shattered on a rainy night, when the unmistakable howl of the rogue echoed through the forest. Kubota was on his feet in an instant, his body tensed and ready to defend. Asha clutched Coda close, her heart pounding in her chest. The howling grew closer, accompanied by the crashing of branches and the rumbling of deep, guttural howls. Kubota responded with a series of thunderous mouth pops, the sound echoing through the cave. Suddenly, a massive figure loomed near the entrance, its silhouette barely visible through the driving rain. Kubota let out a booming roar, his voice shaking the very earth. Adenoa paused, then unleashed an earth-shattering scream that sent chills down Asha's spine. She could see it now, the towering, hulking form of this massive Sasquatch. Kubota continued with more mouth pops. He was trying to intimidate the larger creature to make him back down without a fight. But Adenoa was undeterred. He stepped forward, his massive form filling the entrance of the cave. Asha pressed herself and Coda as far back as she could, anger and terror coursing through her veins in equal measure. Kubota was ready to fight to the death if necessary. He knew he was younger and more agile than the rogue, but the sheer size and power of the creature was daunting. He had hoped to find a way to drive him off without risking a physical confrontation. Kubota stepped forward, moving out of the mouth of the cave and into the open, meeting Adenoa's glare head-on. His heart pounded as he sized up his opponent. Adenoa was larger, older, and scarred from many battles. His thick matted fur was streaked with dark stains from past conflicts, and his eyes glinted with a feral determination. Kubota stood his ground, puffing up his chest and letting out a deep, resonant growl that reverberated through the clearing. He began a series of mouth pops and guttural sounds meant to warn off intruders, signaling that this territory was claimed. But Adenoa seemed unfazed, his expression unmoved, his stance steady as he took another step forward. Kubota could feel the weight of the rogue's gaze, a silent but potent threat. Then, with a sudden, deafening roar, Adenoa charged. Kubota braced himself, his muscles coiling as he prepared to meet the full force of his opponent. Adenoa's charge was fierce, his powerful legs pounding the earth as he barreled forward, each step driving deeper into the ground. The distance between them closed in an instant, and Kubota barely had time to dodge the massive arm that swung towards him. He twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding the swipe. But Adenoa's momentum carried him forward, slamming him into Kubota's side with the force of a boulder. Kubota stumbled back, his body jolted by the impact, but he quickly regained his footing. They faced each other, breathing hard, eyes locked. Adenoa growled, his lips pulling back to reveal jagged, yellowed teeth. Kubota lunged forward, aiming for Adenoa's vulnerable midsection. His fist connected with a solid thud, driving into the thick muscle of Adenoa's torso. The older Sasquatch grunted but did not waver, countering with a swift backhanded blow that sent Kubota sprawling. Kubota rolled with the momentum, quickly scrambling back to his feet. His vision blurred for a moment, but he shook it off, focusing on Adenoa as he approached. Each footfall heavy and deliberate. Kubota's mind raced, his instincts kicking in as he searched for a weakness, a strategy. He knew he couldn't match Adenoa's brute strength head-on. He would have to rely on speed and precision. As Adenoa raised his massive arm to strike again, Kubota feigned a retreat, drawing the rogue in closer. Just as Adenoa swung, Kubota ducked low, lunging forward and wrapping his arms around the rogue's waist. He heaved with all of his might, throwing Adenoa off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. Kubota seized the moment, pinning Adenoa beneath him and delivering a rapid succession of blows to the rogue's ribcage. Adenoa roared in pain, thrashing beneath Kubota's grip, his claws raking across Kubota's side, leaving deep, bloody gashes. Kubota gritted his teeth, fighting through the pain as he tightened his hold, determined to keep Adenoa down. But Adenoa's strength was formidable. With a powerful twist, he managed to dislodge Kubota and roll free. Both scrambled to their feet, breathing hard, their bodies already bearing the marks of the brutal encounter. Kubota's side throbbed where Adenoa's claws had torn through the flesh, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing on the fight. Adenoa let out another enraged bellow, charging forward with renewed fury. Kubota sidestepped, reaching out to grab Adenoa's arm and twist it behind him. Adenoa howled, the joint popping as Kubota applied pressure, attempting to dislocate it. But the rogue was relentless, using his free arm to deliver a powerful punch to Kubota's jaw. Kubota stumbled back, dazed, his vision momentarily darkening. The world spun around him and he shook his head, struggling to stay focused. When his vision cleared, Adenoa was looming over him, his eyes blazing with fury. Kubota barely had time to react before Adenoa's massive fist connected with his shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain shot through Kubota's body as he landed, his muscles screaming in protest. But he forced himself to his feet, unwilling to give up. He could feel his energy waning, but he knew he couldn't afford to show any weakness. Adenoa would exploit it without hesitation. The two giants circled each other, both battered and bloodied, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Kubota noticed a slight hesitation in Adenoa's movements, a faint limp that suggested an injury to his leg. Kubota seized on the opportunity, feinting to his left before darting to the right, aiming a powerful kick at Adenoa's injured leg. The rogue staggered back, his balance momentarily disrupted. Kubota lunged forward, his claws raking across Adenoa's face, leaving deep, bleeding scratches. Adenoa roared in pain, but Kubota didn't relent, pressing his advantage. He landed a powerful punch to Adenoa's abdomen, driving the air from the rogue's lungs. Adenoa doubled over, gasping, and Kubota took the chance to grip his opponent's arm, twisting it until he felt the bone giving way with a sickening snap. Adenoa's agonized howl echoed through the forest, a sound of pure, raw pain. For a brief moment, Kubota thought the fight was over, that Adenoa would retreat, beaten and broken. But the rogue, fueled by desperation and fury, lashed out with his uninjured arm, his claws catching Kubota across the chest. Kubota staggered back, clutching the flesh wound, blood seeping between his fingers. He knew he was reaching his limit. His body was bruised and battered, his strength waning. But Kubota refused to give in. He stood tall, meeting Adenoa's gaze with an unwavering determination. He let out a low, guttural growl, a final warning, daring Adenoa to continue. The rogue hesitated, his body trembling with the effort to remain upright. Blood dripping from his wounds, his fur matted and stained, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Finally, with a defeated snarl, Adenoa turned and limped away, his massive form retreating into the shadows of the forest. Kubota watched him go, relief flooding over him as he realized the fight was truly over. The rogue's silhouette disappeared into the gloom. His labored breathing faded into the distance until there was only silence. Kubota stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, his body aching from the brutal encounter. He could feel the sting of his injuries, the blood trickling down his fur. But he was alive, and more importantly, his family was safe. With a final weary glance at the forest, Kubota turned and made his way back into the cave, his steps slow and heavy, each a reminder of the cost of the battle he had just won. As the roar of the battle faded, Kubota staggered back into the cave, his broad shoulders heaving with every labored breath. He dropped to his knees, trying to slow his heart rate. Asha and Coda watched him, their eyes wide with concern. His thick fur was matted with streaks of dark blood, some of it his own, some of it Adenoa's. Kubota's right shoulder had taken a beating from Adenoa's crushing blows, and his left forearm bore deep gashes. Each step sent jolts of pain through his body, but his gaze softened as he saw Asha and Coda, his family, safe. That was all that mattered. Asha took a tentative step forward, her hand reaching out to touch the deep scratch that ran along his rib cage. "You're hurt," she whispered. Kubota grunted in response, nodding slowly. "It'll heal, in time," he murmured. But he knew that the bruising and torn flesh would take days, weeks, or maybe months to fully mend. For now, he just wanted to rest. He needed to be at his best if Adenoa returned, though something in him doubted that the old rogue would dare to. In the days and weeks that followed, Kubota spent most of his time recovering in the cave, his wounds slowly scabbing over as he regained his strength. Asha stayed close, tending to him and Coda and occasionally leaving the cave to search for berries, fish, and edible roots. Kubota knew that they would eventually need to hunt for larger prey, but for now, he was grateful to have Asha at his side. One evening, Kubota carefully stretched out his stiff limbs. The scabs had tightened over his wounds, tugging at his skin, but the pain was becoming bearable. He felt the urge to leave the cave, to move again, even if only to test his strength. He looked at Asha, who sensed his restlessness, and she gave him a slight nod as if to say, "I'm with you." "We'll go together," he said, his voice softened with gratitude. "The three of us." Asha smiled and gently lifted Coda onto her back. The little one clung to her fur, his tiny hands gripping with surprising strength as he nestled in between her shoulder blades. They set off into the forest, Kubota moving cautiously, not wanting to overextend himself, while Asha stayed close, occasionally glancing over her shoulder to ensure Kubota was still keeping up. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Kubota scanned the surroundings, mentally marking signs of animal trails, listening for any distant noises that might betray the presence of deer. The quiet rustling of the leaves and occasional bird song calmed him, grounding him after the chaos of the recent fight. The scent of deer eventually reached his nostrils, and he motioned for Asha to follow as he led them through a small clearing where he had noticed deer tracks before. Kubota and Asha worked together, setting up a simple trap that used the natural layout of the forest. They found a narrow area bordered by a fallen log and thick underbrush, perfect for funneling any passing deer into a confined space. Kubota then circled wide around the clearing, using his presence to subtly drive the deer towards Asha. She moved stealthily, positioning herself along the makeshift trap's edge. The plan worked, and soon a small deer trotted into the confined space, startled by the sudden presence of the massive creatures. Kubota lunged forward, his powerful arms encircling the deer's neck, and in one swift motion, he twisted, breaking the deer's neck quickly to minimize its suffering. It was a clean catch, and the family would eat well that night. They hauled their prize back to the cave, Coda babbling in delight at the feast. Asha looked at Kubota, her eyes filled with pride. "You're healing well," she said softly, "and still strong as ever." Kubota chuckled, though he winced as he laughed. "With you and Coda here, I have no choice but to be strong." Days passed and the forest returned to its familiar rhythm. The wounds on Kubota's body continued to heal and the nights felt peaceful once more. He could hear the faint cries of Adenoa in the distance less frequently now, a reminder that the old Sasquatch was still somewhere out there, though he posed no immediate threat. Life, it seemed, was returning to normal, or as close to it as possible in the wild forest. But one morning, Kubota picked up a scent that made his muscles tense. It was faint, but unmistakable. The smell of humans. He gestured to Asha, who, sensing his unease, instinctively quieted Coda. Together they crept to the edge of the forest where they could see the faint shadows moving between the trees in the distance. It wasn't the usual logging crew that had disturbed them in the past. These humans were moving differently, more deliberately, and without the usual machinery. A distant, rhythmic thudding echoed through the trees. Kubota's eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of the strange noise. The humans seemed to be hitting trees with some sort of club, mimicking the mouth pops that he and other Sasquatch used as a means of communication and territory marking. The sound was clumsy and far from perfect, but it was close enough to set Kubota's nerves on edge. "These humans? They're looking for us," Asha whispered, her voice barely audible. Kubota nodded grimly, signaling for her to stay low. He couldn't understand why these humans would be trying to imitate their sounds unless they had a purpose. A creeping sense of dread settled over him. If they had come looking for Sasquatch specifically, it meant that they might know more than Kubota had thought possible, and it could mean trouble for him and his family. They retreated back into their cave, laying low and watching from a safe distance as the humans moved deeper into the forest. For hours, the rhythmic knocking continued, each sound reverberating through the trees. Occasionally, Kubota could hear faint voices amongst the humans, though he couldn't understand their words. They were cautious, checking behind trees and looking at the ground as if they were tracking something. Days passed, and though the humans retreated at daybreak, they returned each night, systematically moving through the different sections of the forest, their calls and noises filling the air. Kubota's patience grew thin. But he knew better than to act rashly. One wrong move and he could reveal their presence. Asha, the ever-quiet observer, began to collect leaves and branches, subtly disguising the entrance of their cave with natural foliage. Kubota helped, layering moss and twigs, working together in silence to ensure that their home remained hidden. As the days went by, they felt more concealed, though the presence of the humans was still a constant weight. Coda, though still young, seemed to understand the need for silence, mimicking his parents as they stayed close and quiet. Kubota's heart swelled with pride at his son's adaptability, but he worried about what these humans might bring if they ever stumbled upon their hidden family. One evening, as the humans packed up their gear to leave for the day, Kubota noticed a small group that lingered longer than the others. These few seemed particularly intent, shining flashlights into the trees and leaving marks on the ground. They were placing markers, bright orange ribbons tied around branches, leaving a clear path back to their camp. It was as if they intended to return to that very spot, maybe to investigate further, or worse, set a trap. Kubota knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. He would need to keep his family safe, and that might mean finding a new hiding place, at least until the humans left for good. But moving now with Asha and young Coda would be risky. For now, they would have to remain vigilant, their senses attuned to every sound, every scent, and every movement in the forest. Though the humans' presence weighed on them, Kubota and Asha resolved to stay close to the cave, only venturing out at dawn and dusk to hunt and gather, always careful to avoid leaving any traces of their existence. Their life had changed, but together they would adapt, as they always had. The months passed with the silent tension of a family bound together, yet wary of the shadows that lingered at the edges of their world. Kubota and Asha knew that it was only a matter of time before Adenoa might return, or worse, that the humans would come back, more determined and organized than before. They had sheltered, healed, and hunted quietly, always vigilant, but a gnawing sense of vulnerability persisted. Kubota felt it deep in his bones, the uneasy knowledge that the threats to their family were only growing. For days, the two of them had talked late into the night, huddled together in the quiet security of their cave, discussing their options. They could stay, risking an eventual confrontation with Adenoa, or human encroachment. Or they could venture out, joining a clan they had only seen a few times over the years, but they knew well enough to trust. Ultimately, they came to the shared understanding. For Coda's safety and their own peace, they would need the strength and numbers that a larger family could offer. It wasn't long before Kubota and Asha decided to reach out to this nearby clan. This other group, which they had often seen traveling the edges of their territory, was likely foraging farther north in the Olympic Peninsula, near the densely wooded hills and hidden valleys that had always provided ample cover and food sources. This clan, the Ho clan as they referred to themselves, was known for their resilience and cohesion, a bonded family that had long adapted to the life in the lush forest of the peninsula. The Ho clan was led by two older Sasquatch, Omaki and Terran, who had guided their family through many seasons of upheaval and adaptation. The rest of the Ho clan was made up of younger Sasquatches, Terran's two grown sons, Eric and Varro, and three juveniles, siblings who had come to live with the Ho clan after their own parents were lost to illness. The young ones, barely old enough to roam far on their own, were named Maika, Rayla, and Paka. Together they formed a tight-knit group that rarely ventured beyond the protection of the elder pair. It was late one afternoon when Kubota and Asha decided to make their journey to the area where they suspected the Ho clan might be foraging. They moved with care, carrying Coda on Asha's back, each step purposeful, quiet, conscious that they were approaching the clan's territory and they needed to be respectful. The forest was dense, the underbrush soft and thick beneath their feet, muffling their steps. Birds flitted above, darting between branches, and the canopy cast dappling light across the forest floor. It was a calming contrast to the days of tension they had endured. As they neared the boundary where they had last seen traces of the Ho clan, Kubota paused, signaling to Asha. He let out a low, steady rumble, a vocalization that signaled a peaceful approach, one meant to communicate that they came in friendship. They waited, the forest silent except for the rustling leaves, until finally a shadowed figure emerged from behind a towering cedar tree. It was Omaki, the clan matriarch, her tall, weathered frame moving with an easy grace that belied her years. Her fur was a mix of deep brown and silver, the markings around her face and chest tinged with the gray that comes with age. She surveyed Kubota and Asha with a calm but discerning gaze, assessing their intent in the way that only an experienced elder could. "Greetings, Kubota, Asha." Omaki's voice was low, nearly a whisper, carrying an unmistakable tone of curiosity. "We've seen you before at a distance, but now you come closer." Kubota stepped forward respectfully, lowering his gaze as a sign of deference. "We seek your counsel, Omaki," he replied, his voice sincere. "Our family is small and these times are growing uncertain. We face dangers, both from humans and from others of our kind. We hope that perhaps we could discuss joining your clan, for the safety of all." Omaki studied them for a long moment before gesturing for them to follow. "Come, we will speak to Taryn and the others." They followed Omaki through the underbrush to the secluded hollow, surrounded by towering ferns and fallen logs, where the rest of the Ho clan was gathered. Taryn, the clan's patriarch, stood up as they approached. He was a formidable presence, taller than Omaki, with thick auburn fur and a piercing gaze that spoke of life shaped by the wild. Though his movements were slower than they once had been, the strength in his stance was unmistakable. Beside Taryn stood his two sons, Eric and Varro. Both had inherited their father's build and presence, though they each carried themselves in distinct ways. Eric was the elder of the two, a broad-shouldered, contemplative Sasquatch with a keen eye for observation. He rarely spoke, preferring to let his actions communicate for him. Varro, the younger sibling, was leaner, quicker, and known for his curiosity. His gaze was sharp and constantly shifting, as if he were cataloging every detail of the world around him. At the edges of the hollow, the three juveniles, Micah, Rayla, and Paka, watched Kubota and Asha with wide-eyed curiosity. Micah, the older of the trio, had a protective air about her, watching over her younger siblings with a maturity that belied her age. Rayla, the middle child, was more timid, hiding partially behind her sister, while Paka, the youngest, couldn't resist inching forward, his small form quivering with barely contained excitement. After Kubota and Asha had explained their circumstances, Taryn nodded thoughtfully. "The forest has changed since we were young," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Humans press further into the woods each year, and we've encountered others like Adenoa, desperate and dangerous." Omaki looked at Asha, her gaze softening. "We know the need to protect the young," she said gently, nodding towards Coda, who was peeking over Asha's shoulder with a curious expression. Kubota met Taryn's gaze. "We only ask for safety," he said. "We would do whatever is necessary to contribute. We bring our skills, and we are willing to defend the clan as fiercely as our own family." Eric, who had remained silent throughout, spoke up, his deep voice measured. "We could benefit from extra eyes and hands," he acknowledged. "Adenoa is a familiar name to us. He was once part of a distant clan to the south, but his temper and aggression drove him into exile. I do not doubt he will return one day." Varro, ever observant, nodded. "And the humans. They seem to learn more each season. They have grown bolder, finding ways to mimic our sounds, leaving marks in places we once considered safe." His voice trailed off, and he glanced towards the forest, as if expecting to see a human emerge from the shadows. The clan conferred amongst themselves, and after a brief discussion, Omaki turned back to Kubota and Asha. "You may join us," she said with a soft smile. "But know that our way is one of unity and shared responsibility. We protect each other, and we look out for each other's young." Kubota felt a surge of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," he said earnestly, nodding to each member of the Ho clan. He could see the warmth in Asha's expression as well, and Coda, sensing the change in the atmosphere, let out a happy coo. Over the next few days, Kubota and Asha settled into their new roles within the Ho clan, learning the rhythms of the larger family and contributing wherever they could. Kubota took on patrol duties with Eric and Varro, scouting the borders of the clan's territory and marking areas to ward off any intruders. Asha, meanwhile, helped out Omaki and the juveniles with foraging, sharing her knowledge of hidden food sources and teaching the younger ones how they could recognize the subtle signs of safe trails and hiding places. It didn't take long for the bonds within the new clan to solidify. Kubota quickly found respect for Eric's wisdom and insight, admiring his quiet strength and calm demeanor. Eric was known among the whole clan as a skilled tracker and often led the family on foraging trips, using his keen senses to locate food and steer the clan clear of danger. Varro was a sharp contrast to Eric's steady nature. Restless and always curious, he was often the first to notice changes in their surroundings. Varro had a knack for spotting trails and following even the faintest trails of an animal or human, a skill he had honed since he was young. Though he was cautious and responsible when needed, he often found himself drawn to the edges of the clan's territory, exploring the unknown. The juveniles, Micah, Rayla, and Paka, grew quickly attached to Coda, who was fascinated by the trio's energy and playfulness. Micah, with her natural sense of responsibility, often led games, organizing them into quiet activities that kept them out of trouble. She had been orphaned young, taken in by the Ho clan when Taryn and Omaki had discovered her and her siblings wandering alone. Micah carried the weight of their past, and it showed in her maturity and protectiveness. Rayla, on the other hand, was quiet and observant, always clinging to her older sister, but with a gaze that seemed to see deeper than others realized. She would sit for hours watching the forest with quiet intensity, noticing things that even the adults sometimes missed. Paka, the youngest, was a bundle of energy, bounding around and often getting into harmless mischief. He looked up to Coda, delighted by the chance to have someone even younger than himself to teach and protect, even if he was only slightly older. As seasons passed, Coda grew from a small, curious child into a lively young Sasquatch, comfortable at home within the Ho clan. Each day brought new lessons, new adventures, and most importantly, new bonds. Surrounded by the protective presence of the clan, Coda felt a sense of belonging that only strengthened as he grew closer to his younger companions, Micah, Rayla, and Paka, and from his new mentors, Eric and Varro. Micah had a natural inclination to lead, and Coda often fell into step behind her as they roamed the forest in search of berries, exploring the trees, and simply sharing stories. Micah had a knack for knowing the forest's hidden paths and shortcuts, often leading the others along winding trails and through narrow thickets that only the young could navigate. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, her movements careful and deliberate, and the younger ones, especially Rayla and Paka, followed her lead. One warm morning, the four youngsters decided to explore the edge of the clan's territory, where they had spotted clusters of sweet huckleberries ripening under the spring sun. Micah led the way, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air, catching the faint aroma of the berries in the distance. Coda and Paka trailed behind, while Rayla hung back, her gaze sweeping their surroundings with a wariness of someone who never let her guard down. "Coda, did you know that if you eat a handful of these berries, you won't be hungry until sunset?" Micah asked, plucking a handful of the huckleberries and popping them into her mouth with a mischievous grin. Coda chuckled, knowing full well Micah's playful exaggeration. Still, he relished every berry, savoring the tangy sweetness as they burst in his mouth. Paka, with his boundless energy, darted from bush to bush, gathering as many as he could in his hands, offering them to Rayla, who quietly accepted them, her gaze still sweeping the forest. "Look," Coda said suddenly, pointing to a massive fallen log not far from their path. The log had splintered in places, creating small hollows that were the ideal hiding spots for critters. He approached it carefully, aware of the potential dangers, but intrigued by the possibility of finding something interesting. Paka scrambled over to him, eyes wide with excitement. "Think there's anything inside?" Micah nodded solemnly, feigning the wisdom of an elder. "The trick is to move slowly and listen carefully," she advised, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Otherwise, you might end up with a face full of porcupine quills." Coda, emboldened by Micah's guidance, leaned close, listening carefully for any signs of life inside the log. He heard the faint rustling of leaves and caught a flash of movement. A small chipmunk, darting out and scurrying away, chittering in alarm. The youngsters laughed, relieved that it wasn't something more dangerous. "See," Micah teased, laughing. "You scared it right out of its home." Their laughter echoed through the trees, mingling with the birdsong. These carefree moments in the company of his friends filled Coda with a deep sense of happiness. They might live in a wild and unpredictable world, but with Micah, Rayla, and Paka by his side, he felt safe and, in a way, invincible. As Coda grew older, his life began to shift from the carefree explorations of childhood to the responsibilities that came with maturity. Eric and Varro took a keen interest in teaching Coda the skills that he would need to thrive in the forest. Coda admired both of them deeply. Eric's calm, steadfast presence and Varro's quick-witted adaptability gave Coda two contrasting role models, each with valuable lessons to impart. One misty morning, Eric led Coda to a section of the forest thick with ferns and tall pines. He crouched down, his keen eyes scanning the ground before motioning for Coda to follow suit. "Look here," Eric said, pointing to a faint track in the soil. "What do you see?" Coda examined the ground, his brow furrowing as he studied the print. It was a delicate track, almost indistinguishable in the loose soil, but the faint marks of the claw tips were visible. "Raccoon?" Coda guessed, his tone hesitant. Eric nodded approvingly. "Good. And see how the soil is only slightly disturbed? It's a sign that this track is fresh, made just before dawn." He gave Coda a small smile. "Remember, each track tells you a story. The more you understand it, the more you'll know about what moves through this forest." Coda took these words to heart, and for the rest of the morning he followed Eric around, observing and learning the subtle language of the forest floor. Every print and bent blade of grass held clues to the world around him. He felt a surge of pride with each small success, every correct guess, growing more confident in his ability to read the land. Another day, Varro took Coda out to the river, where they watched fish darting beneath the surface. Varro pointed to a spot where the water was deeper, swirling in slow circles. "That's where you'll find the biggest fish," he explained. They waited in the shadows, avoiding the stronger currents. He reached down, his hand poised above the water, waiting patiently, before darting in to scoop up a shimmering fish with a practiced motion. Coda's attempts were clumsier, but Varro's patience and encouragement kept him trying. "It's about timing, Coda," he said with a grin. "Feel the water, sense where the fish is, and move when you feel the movement." After several tries, Coda managed to catch a fish, and Varro laughed in approval, clapping him on the back of the shoulder. On an early summer morning, Eric and Varro invited Coda on a foraging trip that would take them near the river. Coda was excited about the opportunity and eager to show what he had learned and take on more responsibility. They moved through the forest with a quiet ease, communicating through hand signals and low vocalizations as they foraged for the wild roots and edible greens. The air was fresh, filled with the earthy scents of moss and pine, and the murmur of the river grew louder as they approached the water's edge. As they neared a bend in the river, Eric suddenly held up his hand, signaling for silence. Coda froze. His heart was pounding as he followed Eric's gaze. On the opposite bank, partially obscured by the underbrush, stood a human. A fisherman, casting his line into the river with a steady, practiced motion. The man was tall and he wore a camouflage jacket, blending into the surroundings with unsettling effectiveness. Coda felt his chest tighten. Though he had seen humans from a distance before, he had never been so close to one of them, and the sight filled him with an instinctive fear. He looked to Eric and Varro, and both stood still, their postures tense and alert. "Stay close to the trees," Varro whispered, his voice barely audible. "We'll move slowly, staying out of his line of sight." Coda nodded, his movements careful and deliberate as he stepped back, eyes never leaving the figure on the other side of the river. They skirted along the edge of the trees, moving with a stealth that only the years of practice could provide. But just as they were about to reach the cover of denser foliage, a sharp snap echoed through the air. Coda had accidentally stepped on a dry twig. The sound was faint, but it was enough. The fisherman looked up, his eyes narrowing and scanning the opposite bank. Coda's heart raced, and he instinctively crouched low, pressing himself against the trunk of a tree. He held his breath, and every muscle in his body tensed as he waited, hoping the man didn't see him. But the fisherman's gaze lingered, his expression puzzled as he took a few cautious steps closer to the riverbank. Coda's pulse thundered in his ears, and he could feel the adrenaline coursing through him. Eric signaled to him, pointing upward, and Coda understood immediately. Without hesitation, he began to climb, his strong hands gripping the rough bark as he ascended into the branches, finding cover amongst the thick foliage. From his vantage point, Coda watched as the fisherman continued to search the opposite bank, his eyes scanning the trees where they had been standing moments before. Eric and Varro remained motionless below, blending into the shadows, their figures barely visible against the forest floor. After a few tense moments, the fisherman seemed to lose interest. He shrugged, muttering to himself as he turned back to his fishing rod. Coda waited until the man's attention was fully back on the river before he began his descent, moving carefully and silently until he was back on the ground. Eric gave him an approving nod and Varro clapped him on the back, a silent gesture of pride. They continued moving, keeping a safe distance from the river until they were far out of the fisherman's sight. Only then did they allow themselves to relax, sharing a glance of mutual relief. "That was well done, Coda," Varro said quietly. "Quick thinking, and you moved fast." Coda managed a small smile, though his heart was still racing. "I didn't want him to see us." Eric placed a reassuring hand on Coda's shoulder. "You did the right thing. Out here, you have to trust your instincts, and today, they served you well." That evening, when they returned to the clan's home base, Coda was eager to share their encounter with the elders. Kubota, Asha, Omaki, and Taryn listened intently as Coda recounted his story, his eyes shining with both pride and a lingering thrill of the close call. "You handled yourself well, Coda," Kubota said, his tone filled with pride. "It's not every day that you come face to face with the human and manage to stay hidden." Asha smiled, reaching out to ruffle Coda's fur affectionately. "You're growing up quickly, learning to be cautious and wise in these woods. We're proud of you." Omaki, her gaze warm but thoughtful, added, "It's encounters like these that remind us to stay vigilant. Humans grow bolder every year, venturing deeper into our territory. We must be ready for anything." Taryn nodded, his expression grave. "The forest is changing, and so must we. But with each new generation, we gain strength. Coda, you are part of that strength now." Coda beamed, his chest swelling with pride. The encounter with the fisherman had been a test of his courage, and though he was still young, he felt the first stirrings of what it meant to be a protector of his clan, just like his father and the elders before him. He knew that he had much to learn, but with his new family and his new clan by his side, he was ready for whatever the forest might bring. Coda's world was an ever-expanding canvas of colors, sounds, and sensations, and now, as he neared his first year, he found himself reflecting on all he had learned. It was a strange feeling, this understanding of time, of moments passing and experiences gathering within him like treasures. Just a year ago, he had been so small, a fragile creature, clinging to his mother's fur, relying on her strength and guidance. But now, he felt his own strength blooming, his mind sharpening as he learned to navigate the forest and the life that he shared with the Ho clan. This year had been one of discovery. Each member of the clan had taught him something unique, something vital, and it was these memories that wove together to form the fabric of his young life. Omaki, the clan's matriarch, held a special place in Koda's heart. She was a quiet, observant figure, her wisdom rooted in the countless seasons that she had witnessed. Koda learned early on that Omaki's ways of teaching was subtle, almost hidden. She rarely instructed directly. Instead, she would tell stories, painting images of the past events and creatures of the forest. In those stories lay the lessons Koda would come to understand only with time. One chilly morning, as the mist curled around the trees, Koda sat with Omaki on a moss-covered log. She was speaking of the seasons, her words a gentle reminder that everything in the forest had its time and place. Koda listened intently, mesmerized by her soft, rhythmic voice. "Do you know why the leaves fall?" she asked, her gaze drifting to the towering maples whose leaves had turned to a vibrant red and gold. Koda shook his head, eager to hear the answer. "They fall to make way for new life," Omaki explained. "When they reach the forest floor, they become part of the soil, nourishing the roots of the trees they once adorned. And so, each season is not an end, but a beginning." Koda nodded, understanding that Omaki's lesson was not only about the leaves. She was teaching him about change, about accepting the cycles of life in the forest. He carried this knowledge with him into the months that followed, noticing the changes in the world around him with new eyes. Omaki's wisdom had also taught him patience, a skill he struggled with but he knew that he needed. He learned to sit quietly, to listen to the forest, to feel the subtle shifts in the wind and wait for the right moment before acting. Omaki had shown him that the forest would reveal its secrets only to those who were willing to listen. His father Kubota was his hero, a figure of strength and courage who had protected him and his mother since his earliest memories. Kubota's lessons were different from Omaki's. They were more direct, rooted in action and survival. Kubota had taught him about the power of his own body, about the instincts that flowed through him, connecting him to the generations of Sasquatch who had walked these forests before him. Koda could still remember the first time that Kubota had shown him how to mark their territory. It was a rite of passage, a way to announce their presence in the forest to any creatures that might wander into their domain. Kubota had guided him through the process, showing him how to scratch the bark of the trees and leave scent markings along their borders. "These marks tell others who you are," Kubota had explained, his tone serious. "They let intruders know that this land is protected, that we are here to defend it." Koda had felt a surge of pride as he made his first mark, watching his father nod in approval. He understood that his family's safety depended on their strength and unity. Kubota had instilled a sense of responsibility and a duty to protect the clan and the territory they called home. But Kubota's lessons weren't all serious. He had a playful side, too, one that Koda treasured. There were moments when they would wrestle in the clearing, Kubota showing him moves and letting him practice holds and takedowns. Through these playful sessions, Koda learned agility and balance, and the importance of reading an opponent's movements and anticipating their actions. As he grew stronger, Koda found himself dreaming of the day that he might stand beside his father as a protector of the clan. It was a dream that motivated him, fueling his desire to grow and learn. Varro was a constant source of adventure and excitement. His curiosity knew no bounds, and he had a knack for discovering hidden trails, secret nooks, and fascinating sights within the forest. Varro's world was one of discovery, and he often invited Koda along, teaching him to see the forest through curious and daring eyes. One afternoon, Varro had taken Koda down to a small waterfall, hidden deep within the clan's territory. The waterfall cascaded down into a sparkling pool, its waters clear and cool. Varro grinned at Koda's awestruck expression, taking the opportunity to impart a lesson about courage. Sometimes, the best things are found in places that seem hidden, or even dangerous, Varro said, his eyes twinkling. You have to be brave enough to seek them out. Coda took these words to heart, learning to approach the world with a sense of wonder and willingness to explore. Varro encouraged him to ask questions, to test the limits, and to embrace the unknown. Together they would track small animals, follow winding trails, and even venture to the edge of the river where the currents flowed fast and strong. Varro also taught him the importance of adaptability, of being able to respond to the forest's unpredictability. There was one afternoon that Coda would never forget. They had been exploring a stretch of forest that they hadn't visited before when they stumbled across some fresh bear tracks. Varro had immediately signaled for silence, his posture shifting as he listened to the forest. Listen, Coda, Varro whispered, his voice barely audible. Every creature has its place, but we must respect its place. When you feel the presence like this, you need to trust your instincts. They will guide you to safety. Coda felt a shiver of fear, but he trusted Varro, following him as he quietly retreated. He learned then that courage wasn't about ignoring fear, but about understanding it and how to use it to navigate the wild world around him. Eric was a master tracker and a source of steady guidance for Coda. Eric's lessons were practical, grounded in the skills needed to survive and thrive in the forest. He taught Coda how to interpret the subtle signs left behind by animals as they move silently, and how to stay hidden when necessary. There was a day in early autumn when Eric had taken Coda out to a part of the forest dense with ferns and low-hanging branches. They had spent hours tracking a family of deer, following the prints and the broken twigs that marked their path. Eric's patience was endless, his gaze sharp and discerning as he led Coda through the forest. Every animal leaves a trail, Eric explained, pausing to point out a faint indentation in the soil. If you learn to see it, you can know where they've been and where they're going. It's a way of understanding the forest's story. Coda admired Eric's quiet confidence, his ability to move with such grace and precision. Under Eric's guidance, he learned to slow down and to observe the smallest details and appreciate the interconnectedness of the forest. Eric had shown him that tracking wasn't just a skill. It was a way of connecting to the land, of understanding the rhythms and patterns of life around him. Through these lessons, Coda developed a new respect for the forest and its inhabitants. He felt a sense of kinship with the creatures he tracked, understanding that they too were a part of the same world, following their own paths and living by their instincts. Of all of his relationships within the clan, Coda's bond with Micah, Rayla, and Paka were perhaps the most carefree. They were his closest friends, his companions in exploration and play. Together they had roamed every inch of the clan's territory, their laughter ringing through the trees as they chased each other, shared stories, and invented games. Micah, the eldest of the juveniles, had a calm, steady presence that often reminded Coda of Omaki. She was a natural leader amongst them, guiding their play and ensuring that they stayed safe. Coda admired her sense of responsibility and often looked to her for guidance, trusting her instincts. Rayla, on the other hand, was quieter, more introspective. She had a knack for noticing things that others missed, a faint sound, a distant movement, or a subtle change in the environment. Coda found her insights fascinating and often marveled at her perceptiveness. Rayla had taught him to be more observant, to appreciate the subtleness of the forest, and to notice the quiet beauty around him. Paka, the youngest, was a whirlwind of energy and mischief. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Coda couldn't help but laugh at his antics. Paka had a way of even making the mundane activities feel like an adventure, and Coda cherished the joy and spontaneity Paka brought to their lives. Through Paka, he learned the importance of play and the value of finding joy in every moment. The four of them had countless adventures together, from racing through the forest to seeing who could spot the most animal tracks, to daring each other to climb the tallest trees. These moments of laughter and camaraderie were some of Coda's happiest memories, a reminder that even in a world filled with challenges, there was always room for friendship, Enjoy.